You are here with By the Cover. In this video, we're going to be doing a tier list ranking of all the books that I read in 2025. Timestamps for skipping around will be in the description, along with the books and the author names as well. Before we get into the ranking, I just wanted to do a summary. I picked reading back up after not having read for quite a few years, and this year I read 107 books altogether. I had a goal of reading the worst Stephen King books as far as ratings and consensus online. I'm a big Stephen King fan, but for whatever reason I just had the idea that I wanted to start from the bottom and work my way up. So I read around 30 of his books this year, and a lot of them were the poorly rated ones. I had a goal of reading new authors. I found quite a few that were great, which was really exciting. I had a goal to read the Dark Tower series, which I started and finished this year. And I had a goal to start and finish a different fantasy series. I chose a short one, which was the Tide Child trilogy, and I was able to start and finish that this year as well. Next, I'll explain what I rate books on, and then also a description of the tier list, and then we'll get into the ranking after that. So what things do I rate books on? First off, personal enjoyment. The plot, whether I thought the plot was meandering, if it was a focused plot, whether I liked the plot. Then we have pacing, whether the book read fast, was I ever bored, or did I feel like it lulled in the middle? The character likability, how likable were the characters in the story? Did I enjoy being along the journey with them? Were the characters interesting? This is used to kind of balance out a rating if some of the characters weren't likable, but they were at least interesting. Then we also have character development. How well did I think the characters were developed? Did we spend enough time on their backstory? And did I connect with the characters? Then we have emotional impact. This is if they made me feel strong emotions one way or another. Next is the antagonist. Did I feel like the force that the protagonists were going up against was great? Was it imaginative? Were they well thought out? I rate the endings of the books, what I thought of the endings. Were they rushed? Did they make sense? And lastly, the atmosphere and world building. First, we have F tier, which are books that failed in a major way for me, novels that had major flaws that kept me from fully enjoying the books. Next, it's D tier. I was able to enjoy some aspects of these books, but they had glaring issues that really couldn't be overlooked. Then we have C tier, books that I really personally enjoyed but had slight issues with, or certain sections that were not as strong as other books. Next up is B tier. These are books that I absolutely loved, but certain categories such as plot, character work, atmosphere, pacing, or emotional impact were slightly off. A tier are near perfect books, very little if anything to fault, but not as strong as other books in certain aspects such as plot, character work, atmosphere, or emotional impact. And lastly, we have S tier. These are books that I absolutely loved and were strong in most all categories. So without further ado, let's get into it. I will be giving spoilers as I talk about these books. If you want to see the tier list ranking but don't want to hear my explanations on anything, I will link that in the description and you can just go look at that picture. But there are going to be spoilers, some of them major, as I talk about these books, so if you don't want to hear those, make sure you click off. The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. This was my least favorite book of the year. While I did find the characters a bit interesting, the motivation of the primary character was not well thought out. There was no real explanation as to why he was the way he was, or his brother. I thought the Wasp Factory contraption itself was inventive. The plot for this was just all over the place. The ending was crazy and seemed to come out of nowhere. There were some truly disturbing scenes in this book, which were memorable. The atmosphere was extremely weak in this one. The world building wasn't good. The setting was just pretty much there, but it really wasn't that interesting or well thought out. Overall, it was just a story of a kid that was running around doing a bunch of different messed up things. It's a disturbing story. It's dark. If you like that kind of thing, maybe you'll enjoy it. Overall, I just didn't like it. Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. This was based on a true story. It was just depressing. Overall, I didn't think there were any really strong characters in it. I really thought what happened to the girl was deplorable. And I thought the way that the main character behaved towards her was also extremely deplorable. I did like that he ended up doing the right thing in the end. Overall, I just didn't enjoy the story, and it was pretty disturbing. Apt Pupil by Stephen King. This was a short story. It's about a little kid that attempts to blackmail a Nazi, and he ends up doing more deplorable things as the story goes on. Again, just was not a fun story for me. I didn't enjoy the journey, and I didn't like the two characters that were in it. The Ruins by Scott Smith. This story had a really interesting premise, but ultimately it is just a story about stupid teenagers that make stupid decisions. None of the characters have any arcs, they don't learn anything, and they all end up dying. I also thought the antagonist, while it was inventive, was a little bit too out there. Along the River of Flesh by Krostopher Triana. This is the sequel to Gone to See the Riverman, and that book is much higher ranked on this list, but the sequel did not work for me, and the primary reasons that it did not work are that it leaned into the gore aspect a lot more than the first book. I think the first book was more mystery based, and the second book was also basically a retreading of all the beats that you did in the first book as well. So it's like going on a vacation to a place you've already visited before. While it was exciting the first time, it's not exciting the second time. And the last reason that this one didn't work for me were the characters were not likable at all. None of them were, and they were all pretty basic. I saw the twist coming a mile away. It just wasn't a great book. I did enjoy the way that the primary antagonist talked still, and I did enjoy the atmosphere, but overall this book fell flat for me. Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. This was my first Cormac McCarthy book. I chose it because it was short. Overall, this is just basically a character study story, I guess, following a guy that runs around doing more and more deplorable crap. This one was a quick read, and I kept reading because it was interesting. It was not my favorite story. There is one chapter in this that was brilliantly done, and that's the chapter with the blacksmith talking to the primary character about how to sharpen an axe. I absolutely loved the way that was done. It was an entire chapter of description about doing this one thing, and the payoff at the end was awesome. That is the only chapter that went into rigorous detail in this book. Everything else was very matter-of-fact, to the point, and quick. I've heard the purpose of this book is to show what can happen when someone is outcast from society. Really, I didn't get that from this book. I just thought the primary character was an asshole. I didn't see a reason for him to have the motivations that he has throughout the book, so it did not work for me. I did not like that book. Roadwork by Stephen King. There's two things that I liked in this book. I liked the interactions between the main character and the mob boss, and I also liked the first interaction with the main character and the teenager that ends up going to, I believe, Las Vegas. Those two things in the book I thought were awesome. This was a story about just a miserable human being. He basically sabotages his own life all the way throughout the book. I was rooting for everybody that was in the book to get away from this character. I was rooting for the characters around the primary character more than I was rooting for him. I didn't like him at all. The Breathing Method by Stephen King. The best thing about this one was the ending. The rest of it was just extremely boring. I still didn't like the ending that much either, so it wasn't great. The Running Man by Stephen King. This was a pretty inventive story, especially for the time it was written. It kind of predicts reality TV. I give it props for that, but it just was not my kind of story. It was a very dark, gritty world. There wasn't a lot of hope in it, and it was just basically a guy running from place to place. If It Bleeds. The first story in this one was Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which I really enjoyed. It gave that old nostalgia feeling, like you're reading on a warm sunny day. Next is Life of Chuck. It's a story that is told backwards, which I thought was clever, but the primary subject of this is Chuck, and he likes dancing. I don't care about dancing. I didn't find it interesting. It was boring. Next is If It Bleeds, which is an entry in the Holly Gibney character's storyline. I didn't mind the story. I found it mildly entertaining. I think it just didn't need to exist. It doesn't really further any of the characters' developments. And lastly, we have Rat, which was kind of Stephen King's take on a fairy tale. He used the author trope, which I'm not a fan of, and it just was not an interesting story. Overall, we have Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which I liked. The Life of Chuck, which I did not like, If It Bleeds, which was okay, and Rat, which I didn't like. The Wolves of Calla by Stephen King. This was my absolute least favorite entry by a long shot in the Dark Tower series. Part of the reason I really did not like this book is I read this series in chronological order, not publication date order. So I read The Gunslinger, Drawing Up the Three, Wastelands, Wizards and Glass, Wind Through the Keyhole, and then this book. And we start on the side quests in Wizards and Glass. We get another side quest in Wind Through the Keyhole, another side quest within the side quest in Wind Through the Keyhole. And then by the time I got to Wolves of Calla, I was really ready to get back to our primary characters in the present day. And over 100 pages starting out this book is not with the primary characters. It's with the townspeople of the town that they eventually go and save. I was really done pretty much from the start of this book. I didn't like it. I also found it ridiculous that we have the exact same conversation, especially when Stephen King makes a point in the book. At one point, Jake wants to tell the gunslinger something, and the gunslinger's like, no. You don't tell me something individually. We have a meeting with all of our posse, and then we don't have to re-explain each other. And then Stephen King ends up having the exact same conversation with all the characters like 5 or 6 times in the first part of this book, and it's just repetitive and it doesn't need to happen, and it's annoying. Another thing this book did that I really hated and found really annoying was that it focused a lot more on the high speech. The high speech, which is basically pleasantries, increased about 8,000%. The dialogue being pleasantries means that it is completely unnecessary. These are things like, thank ye, Si, I hope we're well met. Tell me true, Si, tell me true. Oh, good nights and pleasant day morrows to you, Si. It's just crap like that every other sentence, and it gets extremely annoying. This book could have been 300 pages less had they just not included the high speech, and it wouldn't have made a difference. Nothing really happens in this book. The primary action happens in like the last 30 pages of the book. The rest of the book is just hanging out with townspeople doing stuff in town. This is a huge book. It could have been cut down significantly. And the last thing that really bugged me about this book is they build up the Wolves of Calla to be this crazy force that they have to go against. The fighting is done in like 5 pages, and then it's over. They were a nothing burger. That's something that Stephen King has a very bad time with in the Dark Tower series, and we'll get into that later. Overall, I just didn't find anything but 10-15 pages of this necessary for the story. It was annoying to read. Gwendys Final Task by Stephen King and Richard Chizmar. I did not enjoy this one because this was Stephen King at his peak of Trump derangement syndrome. All I remember about this book is Trump was mentioned an extraordinary amount of times, and Gwendy was in space. And I thought that plotline was absolutely stupid. I also did not buy the way that Gwendy thought about the Man in Black. While I get that in the Stephen King universe, the Man in Black is generally bad, I didn't find the Man in Black bad in this series at all. In fact, I found him to be rather truthful with Gwendy as he explained the situations and interacted with her in her life. So I did not get the dislike for him in this series. One House Left by Vincent Ralph. This book was actually a YA novel, which I was not aware of before I bought it. I did not like the primary character. I did not like his family. The secondary characters, which I ended up liking, they're not fully explored until about 80% of the way through this book. So you do not get enough depth early on to really fully enjoy those characters either. I also didn't like the ending of this one, so it fell pretty flat for me. Alice by Christina Henry. I was actually expecting this one to be more magical and supernatural than it was. It was pretty much a dark, gritty story in a very dirty place. I didn't like the 2 primary characters that were in it. I found that the antagonists were imaginative in this one, but they were taken out way too easily by the primary characters. I also didn't like that Alice always had Hatcher to rely on, and any time that she had a problem, he would take it out for her. Horrorstore by Grady Hendrix. I did like the general idea of this. I liked the magazine aesthetic. The plot was kind of interesting, but I didn't like the characters at all, and for whatever reason, the humor just did not hit or land with me in this particular book. I didn't understand whether this was supposed to be a horror or a comedy, and anytime any tension was built up on the horror aspect, it would immediately be diffused with comedy. So I just kind of found the book annoying overall. Next up, Bazaar of Bad Dreams. A lot of short story collections will end up in lower tiers, even if there's good stories within them, because the sum of the parts averages out to be fairly low. And this one ended up being the lowest, even though there were stories in it that I really did like. My favorite stories in this one were Mile 81, Premium Harmony, Bad Little Kid, Blockade Billy, and Drunken Fireworks. Never Flinch by Stephen King. This is the most recent entry in the Holly Gibney storyline. It had a whole bunch of different intertwining stories. We had Barbara being a roadie. She got tired of being a poet because she was so successful. Don't care about Barbara's character. Holly really didn't grow up or learn anything or develop as a character. I didn't get the antagonist. I didn't get his motivations, and I didn't think he was particularly interesting. Jerome was sidelined. Overall, nothing in this book really hit for me. It was enjoyable to read for the most part, but it just wasn't great. Next up is Finders Keepers. Now, I will say that this book was entertaining to read all the way through it, and I did like the protagonists that were brought into the story. But my primary issue with this one was there was no reason for this book to take place. This book would have been over in 20 pages had it made sense. The primary antagonist in this one, the idea is he's so obsessed with this author, but he hates the author because the author had a character and he wrote that character to do some things that the antagonist did not like because he was so obsessed with that character. So the antagonist decides he's going to take him and some of his buddies, and they're going to rob the author. They end up killing the author, but the two things that the antagonist gets out of the heist are unpublished books that have to deal with that character that he can then read, and he also gets money from the author during that heist. So he has both books and he has money. So the plot goes that he wants money for selling the books. So he takes the books to another one of his friends, and that friend says, I can't sell them until the turn of the century. The antagonist gets angry at that. Why, I don't know, because he already has money and he has the books that he wants to read. He has both things that he wants. So what does he do? He goes and gets blackout drunk, which he mentions he knows he already has a problem with. Then he makes stupid decisions which land him in jail for the next 20 years. That plot line makes absolutely zero sense. So for that, I docked this book down big time. And another reason I docked this down is because Stephen King constantly uses the exact same storyline of people being obsessed with authors or the primary character being an author. It gets old. Every single book that you read from him, a lot of them have that same plot line. It's like he thinks that authors are rock stars, and he just loves that idea and he keeps coming back to it, and I get really bored with that plotline. Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian. I really liked the idea of this book, but this book was weird, and the primary issue that I had with it was the tone that should have been had was never appropriately done because the author didn't understand that there should be a change in tone in different situations. For example, if you're sitting and talking with somebody casually over a cup of coffee. That's a bit different situation than there's a demon in your house that is going to take out your entire family, string their entrails up, and have you watch them suffer in front of you. And yet, in this book, there is absolutely zero difference between those two situations. Everything in this book was a casual conversation. There was never any urgency, and so everything reads very calmly. It read really quickly. It was some really interesting ideas. Also, the way that death was handled in this book. People don't actually die. They just have to now live by a different set of rules. With that being said, and that being the reality of this environment, who cares who dies because they're not going to really die. They'll just continue in the story. So the stakes are not that high. It makes you not really care what happens to the characters. The Tommyknockers by Stephen King. This is a book that I really, really wanted to love because I have nostalgia for this. I was a kid when the miniseries came out, and while it may be cheesy, I was a kid when it came out, and I thought it was creepy. So I enjoyed the miniseries. I've since revisited it after reading this book, and there's part of the miniseries that I really like, and there's parts of the book that I like more. But overall, I'm actually surprised that the creators of the miniseries made a coherent story out of what was in this book. This book had a lot of missteps. Stephen King himself has said that this is probably his least favorite book, and he says there's about 300 pages of good story in here, and I would agree with that. A lot of this is just fluff. It's boring. Stephen King also does something that I don't like that he does sometimes, in that he'll start off a big section of this book with, "This person is dead. Now let me tell you the entire story of how they died." And that takes out any tension and any investment that you may have in a character when you know that. I just don't see the point. Just tell the story linearly and let me invest in the character and then take them out. At least I cared about them for the 100+ pages that they were in the story. But if you tell me they're dead outright, who cares? Salem's Lot by Stephen King. I would say this is my favorite of the F tier. Why didn't I personally like this one? I'm not a big fan of just stereotypical vampire stories, and that's pretty much what this was. It had a ton of iconic scenes. I give it full props for being a standout in the genre. I didn't think the characters were as strong as other Stephen King novels. I didn't like the way that some of the characters went out, and overall I just didn't find the entire story all that interesting. I did think that it had good antagonists. I thought Ben Mears was okay. I did not get the love for Father Callahan. I really don't see why he's a fan favorite. It was just kind of a middle of the road book for me. Near the Bone by Christina Henry. This book was actually fairly decent, but there were quite a few flaws with it that I did not enjoy. I didn't think the monster was fully fleshed out. Christina Henry kind of set forth some rules as to why the monster was doing what it was doing, and then contradicts those rules further on in the book. I did like the husband as far as being an antagonist. He was a dickhead and a really good force for the wife to go up against. The secondary characters' behaviors did not make sense at all. For instance, there's a comic relief character. If a monster kills your friend in the mountains, you're probably going to behave a little differently before that event versus after that event. Not in this book. He is cracking jokes beforehand and after the fact. His behavior is never modified, and the weight of the loss of these people is never really felt. Another thing the secondary characters did that did not make sense is after your friend is murdered and hung up by his entrails in a tree, and this being a group of unexperienced college students with absolutely no weapons of any kind, their brilliant plan is they are going to go towards the danger and not get as far away as possible. A lot of things just did not make sense in this book plot-wise, and the monster wasn't really fully developed. This being kind of a creature feature book, it gets docked pretty heavily for those two things. All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. I really enjoyed the first probably third of this book, and that's because it had a character in it that I really enjoyed. The chemistry between the two primary characters and the third character was awesome. That interesting character that I really loved was taken out about 1/3 of the way through the book, and everything after that was just super, super boring. It's kind of a tale of young love, and I didn't really buy the romance, I didn't really buy the motivation or the behaviors of the primary character throughout the book. Ultimately, it was a pretty boring read, but it was well written. Next is Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy. There wasn't any one thing in this book that I really disliked. It was told through the points of views of a family that's living on this island. They have a mysterious stranger that gets stranded on this island after she comes to look for her husband. And the story unfolds telling what happened to her husband who was previously on the island and the connection to the family that takes care of her after she's stranded here. And there's not a whole lot I can say that was horrible about this one, but there isn't a whole lot that I can say that was great about this one either. I was expecting a different kind of story than I got, but it was okay. The Regulators by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. The primary issue that I had with this book was just the repetitive nature of it. There's a certain cycle of things that continuously repeats, and that happens over and over and over, and it gets really boring. Another thing I didn't like about this one is the companion novel is Desperation, which I thought was a far better book, and we'll get into that later. Stephen King takes all of the characters that were in that book and also puts them into this book, except they are not the same characters and they have completely different personalities. That part was confusing. This book also had a lot more characters. Trying to get used to that was confusing as well. I did think it was imaginative, and I did like the antagonist in this book. So there were some memorable moments, but overall not a great book. The Bachman books by Stephen King. First we have Rage, which I will review later, but I think that is a pretty good story. Then The Long Walk, which I think is one of the best Stephen King stories I've ever read. Then we have Roadwork, which I already reviewed in the F tier, which I didn't like, and The Running Man as well. Overall, one brilliant story, one pretty good story, and the other two I didn't care for. Gwendys Button Box by Stephen King. I actually did enjoy this book. The primary problem with it is that not much happens within it. So it's not great, it's not horrible, it just is. Next we have Fahrenheit 451. This book was a really interesting idea. I didn't really like the primary character. My favorite character in this book is the little girl that he meets early on, but she's taken out of the book fairly quickly. None of the characters that are introduced after that are nearly as interesting, and so for the majority of the book I was pretty bored. I also found the ending of this one completely unrealistic. For the time it was written, I think it foreshadowed a lot of the things that are happening today, so I can see why this one is a classic. If you like it darker, which is one of Stephen King's more recent short story collections, I thought overall the stories in this book were fairly decent. My two favorites were Rattlesnakes and Finn. Then we have Everything's Eventual, another short story collection by Stephen King. This one also had quite a few great stories and good quality stories within it. My favorites being Autopsy Room 4, In the Death Room, The Road Virus Heads North, Lunch at Gotham Cafe, and 1408, The Anarchist Cookbook by Matt Dinniman. This book did have some things that I liked. I believe Katerina is her name. She had some good character development in this book. And I liked the fact, I forget the mentor's name, but the group in this book has a mentor they usually rely on, and he was taken out for most of this book as far as somebody that they could rely on. Those two aspects I liked about the book. What I didn't like about the book, surprisingly, was the train system. It was extremely convoluted. I'm usually someone that likes trains, but it wasn't done well in this book. The author even says at the very beginning, don't pay attention to how the train system works if you don't want to. It'll all make sense at the end. That's kind of a summary for most of this book. I just didn't care. At this point in the series, it just seems like a lot of fluff is written into these books that I can skip over, whether that be the stats, the explanations of items, going through training type stuff. It's all just a lot of fluff, and as I continue to look at the books that are further on in the series, they just keep getting thicker and thicker and thicker, almost doubling in size every single one of them. And I can't help but think they could be cut down significantly. So is it worth my time to continue reading these? I don't know. I am going to continue on, but at this point in the series, I'm not really enjoying it all that much. Wilderness Reform by Matt and Harrison Query. This is a story where the issue I have with it is the primary character has everything figured out, which means that nothing is a challenge for him, which means this book is boring. I did think there were some interesting characters in it, but without any strong antagonists for them to go against, this one was not really worth my time. The Nightbirds by Kristopher Golden. This one had a really interesting premise. It's basically a bunch of witches descending upon somebody that broke out of their coven, and the ex-husband of the lady that broke out of this coven assists her in taking care of this child, and he lives on this abandoned ship that is run ashore at sea. The cover alone is awesome. The idea is awesome, but it's also the downfall of the story because most of it takes place on a ship, in the cabin of the ship, and there's not a whole lot you can do with that story. I thought the witches themselves were inventive, and as far as witch stories go, I'm not typically into them, kind of like vampire stories. I thought parts of this were absolutely terrifying. I did like some of the secondary characters. Overall, I just wasn't that impressed with it. Next, we have The Doomsday Scenario by Matt Dinniman. This is the second book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. And in this book, we get into quests. I did enjoy this book about half of it. You do 2 quests in this book. One of them I enjoyed, and the other one I did not. So it's kind of middle of the road for me as far as enjoyment. Part in the Dark by Ania Alborn. This is 2 short stories. The first story was about the obsession of being good looking and fitting in. I did not really enjoy the character in that one, nor did I enjoy the antagonist of that one either, which was her brother. Overall, I just did not enjoy that first story. The second story was okay. It was more enjoyable than the first. Well, this is my least favorite Ania Alborn story that I've read. Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friendo Libs by Adam Caesar. This one was a mixed bag for me. There were certain characters I thought were put into this just for diversity's sake. I didn't think they brought a lot to the table. Another thing that really annoyed me in this one was they took, I forget their names, but there's a gay couple in this. I really liked those characters in the first book. What they did with them in this book is turn them into a bickering couple, and they bicker the entire book. It gets annoying. Super annoying. But from this point on in the series, I really didn't like those 2 characters, where I really liked them in the first book. There were some good parts in this book, and there were some interesting characters that were brought in. There was one person, I forget his name as well. He runs the haunt in this town, which is kind of a haunted house, but you can really feel the passion in his character for what he does and what he wants to do. I really enjoyed that, and I thought the idea of this one was pretty interesting. So overall, kind of a mixed bag book for me. The Red Queen by Christina Henry. This is the second book in the Alice duology. I enjoyed this one more because this focused more on what I thought Alice was going to focus on, which was kind of the magical aspect and whimsy aspect of the Alice in Wonderland story. Overall, though, I didn't think the antagonists in this one were half as interesting as the first book. The entire quest with Hatcher and his daughter didn't really have a satisfying ending, but overall I did enjoy this book quite a bit. Up to this point, I believe this is my favorite Christina Henry novel that I've read. Next is Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This one was really gripping as far as keeping my attention. I didn't really like the primary character. She didn't feel like a real human being. She just felt like a narrator. There was a certain character in this book that I really liked when they were introduced, but then later in the book they're introduced again and they're like a completely different person, which I didn't like. And the ending of this one was absolutely crazy. I thought it was kind of thrown together and I didn't enjoy it personally. Next is Pen Pal by Dathan Arbach. Never have I read a book that has pissed me off more than this book. If there's ever a book that an ending is going to piss you off, this is probably the one. I enjoyed 80% of this book. The writing was crazy good. I really liked the situations and the scenes and the environment. Everything was excellent. The problem with this is the author sets the book up like each chapter is a piece to the puzzle that's all going to make sense in the end. He emphasizes that right at the beginning of the book. So I put my trust fully in this man to deliver at the end of the book. He did not deliver at all. In fact, there's no direct confrontation with the protagonist and the antagonist in this book at all. So yeah, I'm still pissed about this one. I really liked the rest of the book, but as far as pieces fitting together, it didn't happen. The Queen by Nick Cutter. This book had a really interesting premise. It takes place over the course of one day. I enjoyed the mystery. I really loved the antagonist in this book. I thought he was crazy. I thought he had a great motivation. He was just fun to be around. What really killed me about this book was the ending. At a certain point, you just get stuck in a freezer and you're there through all sorts of crazy stuff that would be a lot better if you weren't stuck in a freezer for. So, yeah, I really don't understand the ending of this book. But it was a fun book to read, and I did not hate it. Next up is Holly by Stephen King. Now, I was really looking forward to this book. I was interested to explore Holly's backstory, which I thought would be interesting. But as far as Holly's backstory goes, it was not all that interesting. This book focused a ton on the Barbara character and made the focus of her obsession the entire book being a poet. I don't care about poetry. It was super boring. As far as the things I enjoyed about this book, there's primarily one thing, and that would be the antagonists. I thought the antagonists were absolutely killer. The problem is they're not in the book all that much. There were also a ton of interviews in this book, which got really old and really repetitive. Hide and Seek by Jack Ketchum. This was my first Jack Ketchum book, and it was nothing like I thought it was going to be. This was more of a coming-of-age story for the most part, and then an absolutely batshit crazy ending. Now, I have to admit, I wasn't crazy about the ending, and I had a pretty low opinion of this book when I finished it, but after reading the afterwards and realizing what the inspiration was for the book, I grew to appreciate it a bit more. Bone White by Ronald Malfi. This was my first Ronald Malfi book. I will say that this book had an extremely good atmosphere. It was very claustrophobic, and for the most part, I enjoyed the story almost all the way through, except for the ending. I did not like the monster, and I did not like the way that the book ended at all. I also didn't think that the primary character was the strongest character, and I also didn't think his brother was very strong either. Absolutely amazing atmosphere in that one. Blaze by Stephen King. I didn't have anything that I really disliked about this book overall, but I also didn't have anything that I really loved either. It was kind of middle of the road. It was a fairly inventive story, and it did keep my attention all the way through it. Clown in a Cornfield 3, The Church of Brendo. This one I enjoyed more than the second one for the simple fact that it did not focus on a bunch of relationship drama all the way through the book. This one was a road trip with the primary character from the first book. It had a juggalo in it. It was pretty crazy, and I had a good time with it. I don't think it was as good as the first book in the series. The Dark Tower, Wind Through the Keyhole. This is the fifth book chronologically in the Dark Tower series. I think the first four books in this series are damn near perfect. Wind Through the Keyhole was a drastic step down in quality, but it was still a pretty good book. This is a side quest off of the Dark Tower story, and then you have a side quest within the side quest in this story as well. I found the first side quest semi-interesting. The side quest within the side quest, or the story within the story, I found more interesting. Overall, very imaginative, and I still did enjoy it, just not as much as the first four books. Thinner by Stephen King. This is a book that I went into not expecting to like. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit more than I thought I would. I really like the mob character that is in this book and the interactions with the mob character and the primary character. I thought the ending was very inventive. There were parts of this book where the pacing was off. It did get a bit boring. With a Vengeance by Riley Sagar. I primarily picked this up because it has a train on the cover, and I love trains. This is kind of an Agatha Christie type mystery in a closed environment, which is the train. Overall, I had a good time with this. I didn't think the characters that were in this were the strongest. It kind of took a Clue type scenario where you have very distinctive personalities on this train. It gave a good mystery, and I did enjoy it overall. Stephen King's Just After Sunset. Overall, I actually really liked many of the stories in this collection. My favorites were The Gingerbread Girl, Stationary Bike, N, Mute, and A Very Tight Place. Next up, I'll do these together. We had the first trilogy, I believe, that came out in the Aliens franchise. They were books that were supposed to follow the movies, and the first one was Earth Hive, the second was Nightmare Asylum, and the third was The Female War. My least favorite was the second book in this series, which was Nightmare Asylum. It was still a very entertaining ride. I just didn't think that the antagonist was the strongest. Overall, he was defeated pretty easily in the end. Another thing I didn't like about Nightmare Asylum was the relationship drama between Billy and, I believe it's Mitch. I'm just not a big fan of relationship drama. I didn't feel like Billy's motivations were clear. I didn't feel like she knew what she wanted, and she just seemed like an extremely annoying character. My second favorite was The Female War. This one brought back Ripley. What I really enjoyed about this book was this saw the bringing together of an actual Marine troop. It felt like a very cohesive unit with a lot of interesting characters, which I enjoyed seeing that throughout the book. And I actually liked the ending quite a bit as well. My favorite of the bunch was Earth Hive. The reason that I liked this one the best was there are a lot of antagonists in this book, and all of them are very menacing. Stakes are extremely high. I think we have two strong protagonists. It was just entertaining all the way through it. My dislike with this one is, again, we have an antagonist that is built up to be very threatening, and he's taken out pretty easily in the end. The Mist by Stephen King. This is a really, really inventive and good story. I love the movie as well, which is a bit different from the story. The reason that this gets put in C tier is primarily because it is not a long book, and so there isn't a whole lot of time to really develop and get into all the characters that are in it. But it was a short, entertaining ride. Under the Dome by Stephen King. This book had one of the best antagonists in Jim Rennie and his son. I thought both of them were very deplorable people, and I really enjoyed reading those two characters in this book. The problem with this book is none of the other characters that are going up against them are nearly as interesting. All of the characters seem very, very middle of the road. I thought the small town aspect with Chester's Mill was done well. Another big issue with this one was all of the townspeople's survival skills are non-existent. These people make some of the absolute stupidest decisions. Jim Rennie is only really as good an antagonist because these people are so stupid and they put themselves in really dumb situations. I really wish that the characters in the town were done a bit better and were made to be a bit smarter, but they were not. So that's the primary reason that this book did not end up higher on the list. Overall, I did really feel that this was a good story and I loved reading it. Different Seasons by Stephen King. This one had 4 different short stories within it. Some of them I'll be reviewing later in the list, but we had Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which I really liked. That's one of my favorites. We had Apt Pupil, which I didn't enjoy at all. We had The Body, that they made a movie on called Stand By Me, which is really famous. I really, really enjoyed that one. And then we had The Breathing Method, which I've already reviewed, and I did not enjoy that one either. 2 very amazing stories, and 2 that I did not care for. Rage by Stephen King. This book was actually taken out of publication because it dealt with the subject of school shootings. It's actually not that bad compared to today's standards. The primary character shoots 2 teachers and then sits down and has a conversation with a bunch of students in a room for the remainder of the story. It does turn into kind of a Lord of the Flies type situation. Overall, I didn't think this book was bad. I thought the primary character was interesting. I thought the classmates were fairly interesting. And as far as the short story goes, one of the better ones that I've read. I'm not real sure why it gets all of the hate that it gets. Shroud by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was also a fairly mixed bag. A lot of it focuses on very corporate speak and a corporate structure, but that actually ties in with the themes of this book. The planet was very, very well thought out and imagined. The actual story, I thought, made sense. I thought was brilliantly put together towards the end of the book. This was not an easy read whatsoever. This is one of the harder books that I've ever had to read and get through, but I thought the payoff was worth it in the end. The one thing that really did annoy me that I don't think was really justified is the names of these people are absolutely ridiculous. It's like the author purposefully chose names that are hard to say or just extraordinarily long. Gwendys Magic Feather by Richard Chizmar. I don't really get the hate for this book. I think people just saw it's written by Richard Chizmar and automatically hate it. I didn't really feel like this book was bad. In fact, this was my favorite of the Gwendy trilogy. And I don't recall a whole lot really happening in this one, but I do like the fact that Gwendy gets closer with her parents and the relationship between them is explored a bit more. It really just felt good to read. It's like when Stephen King writes nostalgia, it feels good to read it. That's the same feeling that I got with this book. Cell by Stephen King, another book that I don't get the hate for. This was actually a fairly original zombie type story. I think it really predicted how everyone is glued to their electronics and controlled daily by them. The characters were not the strongest. I did have a favorite character in this book, and they are taken out in an absolutely surprising way. And what followed was one of the most disturbing scenes that I've ever read. It has stuck with me to this day. I thought the story was inventive. I thought it was kind of fun to be along on the journey. I thought the ending was a little stupid. The antagonist was defeated way too easily, but that's a problem in a lot of Stephen King books. Overall, for the most part, I enjoyed this book. The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. This is a very short book It's kind of a medical horror type thriller. It read really quickly. It was really interesting. The pages kept turning. I didn't like the ending on this one. I thought it fell quite short, but I did enjoy the entire rest of the book. Cotton Candy Massacre by Christopher Robertson. Clown in a Cornfield is a similar series that has a trilogy, and I think he's actually gone on to write more than just 3. That is more young adult focused, whereas the Cotton Candy Massacre is not something that should be read by children. There is some absolutely sick and twisted gore in this book, and you're thinking Cotton Candy Massacre, it's going to be a fun book, kind of like Attack of the Killer Clowns. The ways in which people get taken out in this book are so disturbing that even the people I don't like, I'm just sitting there feeling sorry for because they're taken out in really, really gruesome ways. I would say this book is a fun book, but it's a little too over the top in the gore to the point where I just feel sorry for the characters instead of having an enjoyable time all the way through the book. I'm definitely taking a break between the time that I finish this book and when I read the second one because I feel like this is something enjoyed best in small doses. Sundial by Triana Ward. This book was absolutely nothing like I thought it would be. I heard there was animal cruelty in it, and there was not that much animal cruelty in it. There were some experiments on animals. I didn't find anything super bad in that book that was very triggering, for me personally anyway. One thing I will say about Triana Ward is everything that she writes, how she writes, always drags me in and interests me. I just can't stop reading what she writes. And I'll admit this book wasn't like the best book ever. Plot-wise, it didn't go where I thought it was going to go. It wasn't what I expected, but I still enjoyed it all the way through. The characters were not super strong. It kept my interest, and I had a good time throughout the journey. The Unseen by Ania Alborn. This, I believe, is her newest book. This one also didn't go where I thought it was going to go. This is a pretty bleak story. Ania is great at those. Primary reason that this kind of gets a lower score is I was not a fan of the mother in the story. It's a story about how obsession can keep you from seeing the obvious that's around you and how one person can really break up a family. Overall, I think the point of the book is gotten across. It's very unsettling. I thought it was creative. This book also does points of view of different family members that are drastically different in age, and I thought that Ania got the voice right of each age, which is something many authors do not do well. Overall, very enjoyable. I didn't enjoy spending a lot of time with the primary character, which is what dragged this one down for me. Briardark by SA Harian. I've read 2 books in this series now. The next one is Waywarden, which I'll get to in a minute. This particular book, I absolutely love the plot line. The environment was done extremely well. The reason this gets brought down a bit for me is some of the characters act really annoying, and a lot of the focus is on the drama between them rather than on the actual plot line and the environment that they're in. And also they have a side quest with a different character that I didn't find as interesting as the primary plot line. The Staircase in the Woods by Chuck Wendig. Looking back on this one, I actually really enjoyed this journey. I enjoyed the environment. I enjoyed the plot for the most part. It just did not have the strongest characters within it. Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman. This is the first book in that series, and this so far is my favorite. The reason that it was my favorite is one, it introduced a very interesting idea, which was new and fresh. I enjoyed just the absolute craziness of it. It had really, really funny humor, which I found was lacking in future books that I've read. I've read up to book 3 at this point. This book also had a deeper meaning with some really dark stuff if you investigated certain events just a little further. I loved all of the aspects of this book for the most part. Carl and Donut, again, aren't the best characters, but they are fun to be along on the journey with. Overall, pretty good rating. The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. This is the first book in the Tied Child trilogy and my least favorite, but it is still very, very high up there. The reason that this is my least favorite is the author introduces a new language that you need to learn for this world. And a lot of this book is spent learning that language. It is slow in that regard. It's also quite a bleak world. But aside from that, I really love everything else about this book. The world building is amazing. The Quichens are an awesome idea. I loved the plot. I love the characters. It was a very good book. Joe Hill, Heart-Shaped Box. This is the second Joe Hill book that I've read. The first one I read was Nosferatu, which we'll get to later. A very solid entry in the books that I've read by him. I didn't love the primary character, but I did grow to like him more throughout the book. I really loved his friend's character. He's taken out pretty early in the book. A very, very good plot with a bit of a twist at the end that I didn't see coming. Waywarden by SA Harian. This is the second book in the Briardark books. This one I liked more than the first book because I wasn't getting to know the characters. It was just a continuation of where they were previously. I also thought that this one focused less on drama between the characters and actually focused more on the plot, which I found way more enjoyable. And while I don't think the characters are the strongest, they're not bad and they're not super annoying when the entire focus of the book isn't drama between them. End of Watch by Stephen King. This is the third book in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. It saw the return of the antagonist in the first book. After reading Finders Keepers, which I already mentioned I did not like, I was more than happy to get back to the antagonist that was in the first book because I liked Grady as an antagonist. I've read a lot of people were surprised that this went supernatural where the first two books were not, and to that I say, have you read any Stephen King books? To me, this was just the natural progression. I actually really enjoyed the plot. I thought this was a great wrap-up to that series. Next is Palmetto by Ania Alborn. This is a very short story. This one was just a good time to read. This deals with a fear that most all of us have had at one point or another in our lives. Ania writes this in a way that I would be reacting in certain situations if they occurred to me. I related to this one. I thought it was hilarious and freaky at the same time. It was a good time. Next we have Micro by Michael Crichton. I play a game called Grounded, which is about a bunch of kids, basically Honey, I Shrunk the Kids in game form. This takes that idea, adds a bit of gore in there. It's a really entertaining time. I just love the concept of that. And I love that plot line. So this one was really interesting to me. You had Michael Crichton in there writing some of it. It's like the Jurassic Park of bugs. What threw me off in this book, what I didn't enjoy, was some of the dialogue between the antagonist and certain other characters. Some of this book is really well written, and some of the dialogue is like a kindergartner came in and took up the job of writing the dialogue. Now, I don't know which portions Michael Crichton wrote as opposed to Richard, I think it's Preston, but my guess would be that is some of Richard Preston's writing. It's just cartoonishly bad. But looking past some of the stupid dialogue, which occurs mostly at the beginning of the book, it was an absolutely wild ride. I did think the scene with the tiny airplanes was a bit much, but overall thoroughly enjoyed this one. We Used to Live Here by Marcus Klewer. This is a story about if strangers show up at your house, ask to take a look around, and just never leave. I love the premise of this. I loved the way it was written. I love the two primary characters in it. It was fun all the way through it. I really don't have anything bad to say about that book. The Way Up is Death by Dan Hanks. This one was a very fun journey. I expected kind of a Saw-esque type story here. What I got was actually a lot deeper than that. I thought this went deeper than I was expecting it to go, exploring the meaning of life. It was really interesting. I ended up caring about some of the characters. It also had just a lot of imagination, and I thought it was fun. I really don't have anything bad to say about this one either. Next is The Dark Tower, which is the last book in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. My main issues with this book, it's a great book overall. I thought all of the antagonists were taken out way, way too easily. Stephen King has the ability to build some of the greatest antagonists in the history of existence and then just piss them away. And I'm not going to go into details on every single one of them, but all of them were taken out very easily. It was more about the journey along the way. And the other reason I take off a little bit is because my favorite protagonist was taken out early on in this book, which I thought was a stupid decision. Next is Song of Susanna. A lot of people rank this one very low. I actually enjoyed this book. Now, Susanna is my least favorite of the protagonists. This book made me like her character more because it spent more time with her and gave her some further development. So overall, I did enjoy it. It was a place I didn't think that we were going to go, and I don't really have much bad to say about it. The Gunslinger by Stephen King. This is the first book in the Dark Tower series. This is the one that started it all. I've read this more than any other book in the series. I've probably read it 6 times. I would always start the this book, I would maybe get into the second book a little bit, and then I would quit the series. I did that throughout my life several times. But this year I decided to buckle down and read the entire thing because I hadn't done that before. This one's just really enjoyable. It starts out the world. It introduces several of the characters. It introduces probably one of the best antagonists of all time, the Man in Black. The only thing that I disliked about this was I thought the pacing was a little off in certain areas, specifically with the slow mutants portion of the book. But other than that, I love this one. I'm thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This book was also pretty short. This one hooked me from the very beginning and kept my interest all the way to the end. I wouldn't say what happens in it is the most interesting, but the way that this is written is very, very interesting. The one thing that I do mark this book down for is I've seen this plot line done in a previous book that I've read, as far as the way that things end up in it. Overall, really good book, and I do recommend it. Dreamcatcher by Stephen King. This is a book I thought I was going to hate. It's one of Stephen King's most hated books. I remember not liking the movie. After reading this book, I thought it was an absolute great book. The first half of the story focuses on developing the 5 characters, and the second half of the story focuses more on their conflict with the army and the primary antagonist. I will say that I enjoyed the first half of this book more than the second. I thought the second half of the book dragged on a bit. There were some annoying parts in it. For example, when the pedestrians were breaking out of the barn. But overall, I thought this was a very inventive story, and I enjoyed the journey all the way through. Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. This was another book that kept my interest throughout the entire thing. I loved the characters within this one. It was a good mystery with a decent twist at the end. As far as thrillers go, this was a really good one. Senseless by Ronald Malfi. This was kind of a crime noir book with a hint of the supernatural. There were a couple of different storylines that came together. I thought this one was absolutely crazy. It was a fun journey. I loved the cover art there, and I absolutely loved the setting of LA for this book. Desperation by Stephen King. Just a really enjoyable book with a crazy premise. I really loved the cover art of the hardbacks and how this, along with the Regulators book, forms one cohesive picture. I loved Calla as an antagonist. I loved the idea of this one, and I liked the ending as well. Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Caesar. I was expecting a slasher type book, and I did get that, but what I didn't expect was to come to care about the characters that were getting slashed. I really loved almost all of the characters in this book. They seemed like a good tight-knit group of kids. It was exciting seeing who was and was not going to get picked off. I also thought the idea of the antagonists was well done as well, and fairly original. Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana. Along the River of Flesh, with a sequel of this, wound up in the F tier. This one was the first journey in this world, and it goes in the A tier, absolutely. This was an incredible journey. It was a great mystery with a protagonist that you don't know whether you trust or you do not, and an absolutely killer, no pun intended, antagonist in this book. Just the way that he is and the way that he talks gives him a super crazy aura. The environment was very well done, great characters. It was a little short, but that just kept the pace going. So really, really good book. Highly recommended. How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. The core of this book was family relationships, which is why I loved it so much. It dealt with the supernatural, and it was an absolute fun journey to be along throughout its entirety. I love how we start out thinking one thing at the beginning of the book about certain events, and towards the end we know things are different. And this one just had a lot of heart. It had great humor that hit, and it was also creepy. And if you can mix genres well, then more power to you. I think that's a very hard thing to do, and I thought Grady Hendrix did an absolutely great job in this book. While I didn't like Horrorstore, which is the book that I read before this, primarily due to the weak characters and the humor that I thought didn't hit, this one I absolutely loved, so I'm glad I gave him another chance. And I really can't wait to read more of his stuff. The Neighbors by Ania Alborn. And this one was just a fun journey with characters that I loved. They could have been doing anything. The plot could have been completely different, and I would not have cared. I just love the journey of this book. I don't really have anything bad to say about this one. Stephen King's drawing of the three. The only reason I can think this gets marked down just a little bit is because it's kind of confusing to start off with. Like I said, in my younger years, I started this book and never finished it so many times. The first part has to deal with crab-like creatures and Roland, and it's a bit much. Other than it being slightly confusing, absolute killer entry in the Dark Tower series. You're introduced to the three other primary characters besides Roland. It is just a wild ride all the way through. Very, very imaginative. Absolutely love drawing of the three. It just barely made the A tier and not the S tier. Cujo by Stephen King. He doesn't even remember writing this book. I really enjoyed this book. It's very iconic. Cujo scared the living crap out of me when I was a kid. I thought the movie was pretty decent. This book, aside from being about a rabid dog, is about the relationships of families and tight-knit groups in this small town. If you're not into that type of thing, I could see where you wouldn't enjoy this book. I really thought that the characters were interesting, and most of their arcs I thought were really good. The one person's arc that I did not enjoy at all was one of the characters' husbands, and I believe he works on like snack cakes or something, developing snacks, and I really didn't like that part, and I really didn't like that character's arc. Everything else in this book was awesome. It's truly heartbreaking to see the transformation of Cujo. It's given from his perspective. I really enjoyed this book. Last House on Needless Street by Triana Ward. As I mentioned before, just the style of writing that Triana Ward does is very intriguing to me. I read this earlier in the year. This is my favorite one of her books. This was a book that I did not guess what was going on all the way through it. I liked the ending. I've seen this ending done in other books, but this is the first time that I personally read it, so I just really enjoyed this book. It was unique, a good story that delves into the effects of abuse. Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. I'm not sure if this was Stephen King's first attempt at crime fiction, but I really enjoyed this book. The antagonist was a tech guy, and I'm a tech guy. I found him interesting. I liked how I could see what his flaw was and how it worked against him towards the end. And this was the introduction of Holly Gibney's character. This was back before she was the perfect character that she is today, when she had the most development. This is also the introduction of Jerome's family, and I rather enjoyed his family and the characters in it as well. This also features Barbara before she was made into a perfect quote-unquote character. The Outsider by Stephen King. I liked this even more than Mr. Mercedes. I believe this is the fourth or fifth book in the Holly Gibney storyline. This is after the Bill Hodges trilogy. A book that had me guessing all the way through it. I didn't like the detective character so much, but all the other characters in this book were great. Very interesting villain, and just exciting to read. It's also a book that I didn't think I was going to enjoy. I was all the more surprised when I absolutely ended up loving this book. The Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King. This is a short story. I don't know of another author that can write a prison story that makes you kind of want to be in prison. Stephen King can write an intriguing story that you just kind of want to be in the middle of like no one's business. And that's what this is. It's the story of Andy going through the prison system, the people that he meets along the way, and the relationships that are formed. The movie is very good, and so is the book. The Wastelands by Stephen King. This is the third book in the series. This book sees the forming of the full quartet, the last member being Jake. It also sees the introduction of Blaine the Mono, which is one of my favorite antagonists, simply because he's a train, but I also think the idea and how they beat him is very inventive. This book also introduces Oi to the cast of characters, their faithful companion. A lot of great moments in this book too, with the cyborg bear, the haunted house, the TikTok man, and the wasted city. Very, very good book, very imaginative. Absolutely love this one. The Body by Stephen King, also known as the movie Stand By Me. This is a coming-of-age story of four friends in a small town. Just pure nostalgia with this one. Absolutely brilliant characters, each one of them very individualized, with very unique traits. An interesting journey for four kids to go on. The Night Parade by Ronald Malfi. This is kind of a zombie apocalypse type story, but I think it's a pretty unique take on it. This isn't like a super epic story in scope. It focuses on a father and daughter's journey, kind of a Last of Us vibe. The reason that it's so high up on the list for me is it has a lot of heart, and the plot is pretty good too. And I like the way that Ronald showed the world devolving. The Bone Ship's Wake by R.J. Barker. This is the third book in the Tied Child trilogy. This was a book about sacrifice. This is where things aren't going so well for the group. There are a lot of trials and tribulations that they have to go through. Some very imaginative monsters. Some of the best world building that I've ever seen. I love the Galame. I love the language, and I absolutely love the characters in this series. I thought The Bone Ship's Wake was a very fitting end to this trilogy. Call of the Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. This was the second book in the Tied Child trilogy and my favorite of the bunch. Why was it my favorite? Because this one was the most fun. We saw all of the shipmates go through growing pains and finally become kind of one cohesive unit with a common goal. And it's fun to see them operating at that level. Just competent people doing their job, knowing what to do, and being able to depend on each other. This is also where they start to see some success in what they're doing as well. Brilliant world, absolutely brilliant series. I can't recommend it enough. Push through the annoyance of having to learn the language of the first book. I guarantee it's worth it. Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This was my first Brandon Sanderson book. So far the only one that I've read, but I'm very, very impressed with this. I absolutely love the world. It was imaginative. It's kind of a whimsical fairy tale type story. It was very charming. The only thing I can nitpick in this was I didn't think the antagonist was all that strong. It's one of those stories that I just loved the journey, and I absolutely loved the characters in this book. Brilliant, brilliant book. The Long Walk by Stephen King. If this isn't his first story, I know it's a very early story that he wrote in his career. And I love this one even more than Shawshank and The Body. Again, just really good, interesting characters. A very, very interesting situation. This one had more heart than apocalyptic stories such as The Running Man. It had a really good message. It was kind of a metaphor for life. I also saw the movie and I really enjoyed the movie as well. The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This is my first Joe Abercrombie book, and I've read a lot of criticisms on this one that it isn't the first law. Well, I haven't read the first law, so I don't care, and that's not something that factors into my rating. The best way I can describe this book is that it's like reading an action movie that has a lot of comedy in it. But the characters in this book are just so, so good. I love every single one of them. And I thought the humor hit. With me, it hit. So did the adventure aspects, and I really liked the plot as well. So I cannot wait to read more in this series. I can't recommend this one enough personally. Brother by Ania Alborn. This book is very, very, very bleak, but it is such a good story, and the tension in this is extremely high. It's a book about a kid's journey as he tries to navigate the world while being intertwined with a family of serial killers. And he doesn't quite belong in this mix, but it's the reality of the situation that he is in. And it's kind of a coming of age story as he develops a love interest, and what that really means. It's him chasing a dream that he knows can't happen, and the effects of what this does to the other characters in the book. It's a book where you are just dreading the interactions with normal people because it's like prey, but they don't know they're prey. You do, but they don't. So it's just kind of this impending feeling of dread, and it is so well done. This is my favorite Ania Alborn book so far, The Neighbors being a close second. Nosferatu by Joe Hill. This was my first Joe Hill book, and so far my favorite. This is a book I didn't think I was going to like either. I am not a vampire story guy. This was a unique take on vampires. It's Christmas themed. I read it during Christmas time. I absolutely love the primary and secondary antagonist in this book. I think they're very interesting. I love the world that he built here and the rules that surround what happened. The characters are very flawed to the point the main character kind of pissed me off a lot of the way through the book, but she ended up having some really good growth. This book was also very heartfelt. It was high on the emotional scale towards the end, not all the way through the book. When this book finished, I wanted to reread it immediately. It was just really, really good. Right then, I knew that Joe Hill had a lot of characteristics of how his father writes, but very focused, less repetitive, and well thought out, as opposed to Stephen King, who can kind of meander, and sometimes his stories don't seem all that planned out. So this book really cemented Joe Hill as an author that I want to read more of, and I know I'm going to enjoy his work. Wizards and Glass by Stephen King. This is my favorite of the Dark Tower series. I think the first 4 books were darn near perfect. This one barely edges out the other ones. Not a book that I thought I was going to enjoy as much because this deals with Roland's history. And by this point in the story, I really love being on the journey with the 3 primary characters in the present time. I wasn't enthused about going back and seeing Roland's past as much. But I have to say that after reading this, I was almost more invested in the past story than I was in the present story. I love the characters in the past story. I did not want to leave them. This book just had a really good plot, really good characters, very, very high emotional impact. And you get to see why Roland is the way that he is and how he came to be. Brilliant story, one of my favorite books. The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is my favorite book of the year. This book was creepy. This book was disgusting as far as making you squirm in your chair. The descriptions in this were horrifying. This book was nothing like I thought it was going to be. I actually thought this was a book where we were going to spend time with Boy Scouts on an island having to eat each other because they were stranded there. That is not what this book was at all. The way that Nick Cutter formulated this with the intertwining of news clippings or TV interviews along with the primary story, normally that is something that I absolutely dislike because I'm like, this doesn't really relate to the primary story. I don't care about these things. These are just side tangents. In this case, it was offering a different perspective from the boys that were living it in real time versus what may have happened in a different place in the timeline from other perspectives. It was done very well in this book. Absolutely loved the secondary snippets that we got, but also the primary plot line and all the characters that were involved in either of those things. There was also a surprise second antagonist, and while I did think that was a little over the top and not needed, it was still entertaining to have that there. It was my first Nick Cutter book. I will definitely be reading more of him in 2026. So that about does it for the tier list. I would encourage everyone to read a bit more next year. Enjoy life. Until we meet again, we'll catch you later. Thanks. Bye.